Finally, we have Sarah Consoli, who will present on behalf of Nicola Pocock and her team on knowledge, attitudes, and practices on institution-related trafficking, child domestic servitude, and cross-border trafficking in Haiti. And they're presenting on the results from a baseline survey that they did there. Sarah is the Associate Program Manager of the Human Trafficking Research Initiative at Innovations for Poverty Action, which is supporting this project. And I'll note has an active call for proposals out now, or call for letters of interest. So please check that out if you haven't already. Prior to joining IPA, Sarah worked as an economist at the Food and Agricultural Organization of the United Nations and at an anti-trafficking nonprofit in California. Like I said, she's presenting on behalf of Dr. Pocock, who's on leave at the moment, but she's an honorary faculty at the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine and a mixed methods researcher on child labor. Until recently, she was head of data and research at the Lumos Foundation, working alongside research and M&E colleagues Rachel Stemp and Carl Stephen St. Louis. Over to you, Sarah.
All right, so yes, I work for the Human Trafficking Research Initiative at Innovations for Poverty Action. And like Jesse mentioned, we funded this study where Nicola Pocock and her team looked at an existing data set and have synthesized all their findings into a working paper, hopefully coming out soon. This presentation will look at conceptually grounded insights on modifiable determinants of trafficking-related outcomes to inform a counter-trafficking behavior change campaign in Haiti in the future. So Dr. Nicola Pocock, as Jesse mentioned, is honorary faculty at London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine. Her colleagues and co-authors, Rachel Stemp. Rachel's currently a senior research assistant at University of Hertfordshire, and Carl Stephen St. Louis is the project manager for M&E in Haiti at the Lumos Foundation. So there are an estimated 59,000 Haitians in modern slavery as of 2018. This presentation focuses on child trafficking in Haiti, which can take a few primary forms. The first is in residential institutions, including orphanages. There are an estimated 25,000 children living in mainly privately run institutions not registered with the government. Many actually have at least one living parent, but yet are living in these institutions. Parents will place their child in orphanages, hoping they'll receive better care, but many have deplorable living conditions where children are at risk of severe violence, exploitation, and neglect. And something interesting that Lumos has found is that Haitian institutions actually receive $100 million annually from well-meaning donors, and while many institutions are established with the best intentions and provide adequate care, some have been found to pay child finders to recruit children, and some will actually pay parents to give their children away. And then the orphanages will use the children to attract more donor money. Another form of child trafficking that can take place is within child domestic servitude or restovac in Haiti. There were an estimated 400,000 restovac in 2015. They are extremely vulnerable to abuse and exploitation in private households, often have a lack of education, work excessive hours, and are exposed to occupational hazards and violence, with 40% of females reported to experience sexual violence. The last form is cross-border trafficking to the Dominican Republic. For girls, this can occur mainly in the form of sexual and domestic exploitation, and boys for forced labor. And this occurs in part due to a border regime with few migration controls. So the goal for this study was to fill in the gap. There have been many studies conducted on restovac in Haiti, but none have simultaneously investigated the practice of placing children in institutions, including how families consider trade-offs of placing children as restovac versus institutions or cross-border migration opportunities, and how all of those different factors can play into decision making. So their study empirically examined knowledge, attitudes, and practices around these varied forms of trafficking in Haiti with the goal of describing and identifying modifiable determinants of behavior to ultimately inform the design of a future behavior change campaign. There have been little research done on behavior change campaigns, or BCCs, with mixed results. There actually was a BCC planned for Haiti, but it was delayed due to the 2021 earthquake and ongoing political and civil unrest. But hopefully the findings are still helpful to design conceptually sound interventions and inform future BCC activities. So I will go over the methods they use, some of the data and descriptive statistics they found of the population, and the results and some of the policy implications that they found. So first, for the methods, they used bivariable data analysis with chi-squared tests, as well as adjusted analysis using classification and regression trees, or CART. And this is a method to explore predictors such as knowledge and attitudes on primary outcomes in the multivariable analysis. There's some examples of these CART diagrams that look like a tree in the annex, and you can find the slides posted on the conference website if you want to take a look at those. So they sought to explore the associations between knowledge, perceptions, and practices, and the potentially supportive behaviors that they outlined for child trafficking. So these primary outcomes that they were looking at, the first was having a rest-a-bok in their home, so something people actually reported, and then some potential behavior outcomes surrounding institution-related trafficking and cross-border trafficking. So these were hypothetical situations where they asked participants how they would react in a situation. So for institutions, examples of these were, would they help a relative to open an orphanage, or would they help parents place their child in an orphanage? And then for cross-border migration, would they consider crossing the border illegally, or would they consider acting as a broker for domestic work? So their data came from an existing baseline survey done in 2020 by the Technology University of Haiti, with 530 participants. Most of these were from general population households, using a two-stage cluster sample of households in 12 communities. You can see on the map where in Haiti those communities are located. They also had a purposive sample from contacts of Lumos Foundation and their partners. These were from heads of vulnerable families who have actually placed their children in an institution as rest-a-bok or in cross-border migration to the Dominican Republic, or vulnerable families who hadn't done so, but were below the poverty line. And they also interviewed 33 police officers and judges. And lastly, they collected qualitative data from semi-structured interviews with heads of vulnerable households, policymakers, police and judges, NGO stakeholders, and held to focus group discussions with vulnerable families in order to contextualize their quantitative findings. So some of the interesting descriptive statistics, the first is that 5.6% of the whole sample actually reported having a rest-a-bok. And then for vulnerable families, you can see in that third column, a third had actually sent their child away as rest-a-bok, and over 2/3 had sent their child to an institution. And again, due to purposive sampling for the vulnerable families who had done either of these two things, and the fact for a specific question of whether they had ever asked relatives to stop using rest-a-bok, potential behavior outcomes were used for institutions and cross-border migration instead of these reported activities. So some of the results that they found overall, for institutions, a third of the population had actually visited an institution, and a fifth knew someone who had placed a child in an institution. The majority said they would help relatives open orphanages. So this was 73.4%, and help parents place children in them, 67.6%. However, despite this, many perceive orphanages to be harmful to children's development, and that orphanages exploited children, and that many children were vulnerable to sexual abuse within them. This was 30% that they were harmful, 66% that they exploited children, and 69% that they were vulnerable to sexual abuse. Beliefs that orphanages were the only viable option for those from poor families, and knowing others who had placed children in orphanages were strong predictors of potential behaviors supporting them. Next, for child domestic work, the majority recognized the harms for children associated with Restovoc, including sexual abuse, 83.8% recognized this, and overwork, 94.5% recognized this. Some factors that influenced whether they had a Restovoc. The first were knowing friends and relatives with Restovoc, viewing that it formed a sense of solidarity and not perceiving Restovoc to ever be victims of trafficking. Lastly, for cross-border migration, there was much less support for cross-border potential behaviors than for orphanages, such as crossing illegally, 79% would not, or acting as a broker, 78% would not. Some predictors of potential behaviors related to irregular cross-border migration included positive, optimistic beliefs about entrusting female relatives to smugglers. 11.5% thought it would protect them from sexual abuse to entrust them to a smuggler, and belief that living conditions and opportunities in the Dominican Republic were better than in Haiti. 30.7% thought this. So some policy implications. First, for institutions, the team suggested that having access to and knowledge of alternatives to orphanages would be important to shift potential behaviors that support their continued existence. They recommended that the Ministry of Social Affairs and Labor should continue to develop family and community-based alternative care, including foster care and support family reunification. Ideas that they noted for a behavior change campaign, or BCC in that second column, could include case studies of successful fostering placements and family reunification to showcase these alternatives to a wider audience, emphasizing how access to wider social and financial support, such as public welfare schemes, could enable families to stay together. Next, knowing friends and relatives with Restovoc, or for child domestic work, knowing friends and relatives with Restovoc, which isn't a modifiable factor if they know relatives with Restovoc, normalizes the practice. And so the team noted, in an absence of viable alternatives, such as affordable and accessible community-based childcare, attracting adults to domestic work instead through minimum wages and protections, and more immediate solutions of policies that support safe and decent work for child domestic workers. In the absence of all of these alternatives, knowledge of harms in the short term does not necessarily influence having a Restovoc. BCC could emphasize that true solidarity for Restovoc should include safe and decent working conditions for children above the minimum age, drawing on campaigns conducted in other settings, for example, Freedom Fund's current child domestic work campaign in Ethiopia. And then lastly, for cross-border migration, in reality, Haitian migrants have higher earning potential and job opportunities in the Dominican Republic. So in the absence of viable alternatives at home in Haiti, migration flows are going to continue. The team noted that a BCC could emphasize that optimistic beliefs are erroneous. For example, the idea that entrusting female relatives to brokers does not protect them from sexual abuse. And evidence from other settings currently only indicates that blanket bans on informal brokering drive the practice underground. And so policies that support migrants' knowledge of options to them for recruitment, such as an app that might rate or give information on different brokers, could potentially be effective. And they noted that a review of evidence in this area regarding what works should be conducted to inform policy interventions. So lastly, in conclusion, overall, behavior change campaigns could showcase successful fostering placements and promote awareness of wider financial and social welfare schemes to keep children at home, as well as looking at just some of the realities of cross-border migration. Also, beyond awareness campaigns, donors and NGOs should continue supporting development of policies and services that would enable Haitian families to stay together as a preventative mechanism for the child trafficking that can take place. Some limitations that the team noted of this study. First was that the survey was conducted in 2020 during COVID-19, and COVID actually amplified some of the mistrust that was already prevalent among the Haitian population due to ongoing political instability and conflict. So it took a long time for enumerators to establish trust and reach the desired sample size as a result. And kind of this fed into the fact that it was intended that this baseline survey could inform a behavior change campaign, and then a subsequent quasi-experimental evaluation could occur, but sampling methods would not allow for a future evaluation given with this baseline survey, given that there would be spillover risks across the 12 municipalities that were ultimately selected, and uncertainty of who would be implementing the BCC and their ability to evaluate it. Hopefully, the findings will still inform a BCC and subsequent interventions and potentially a future evaluation. And then lastly, the use of purposive sampling of vulnerable families that Lumos or their partners knew on some practices, such as sending children away as restovoc or to an institution, meant that they couldn't conduct direct bivariable, multivariable analysis with these as practice outcomes, and they had to use potential behaviors as outcomes instead. But as you could see here, it still offers really interesting and relevant findings for interventions. So that's all I have. You can feel free to reach out to IPA's Human Trafficking Research Initiative with questions on this project. Our email's listed there. You can also contact Lumos Foundation, or Dr. Pocock. She is the corresponding author, so you can feel free to reach out to her. Thank you so much, and I'll pass it over to Jessie.
Thank you so much, Sarah. That was an excellent presentation, and it's not easy to present on behalf of someone else, so really appreciate your effort there. And a big thank you again to all the panelists. I think I've been working at Stanford too long because I can't remember the last time people ended on time without needing to be reminded. So thank you all for sticking